One of the things I ask my clients all the time is, are you hydrated today? I always want to make sure that they're hydrated before they come in for a session. And probably the most common answer that I get from them is, oh yeah, I've had a lot of water. But that's not what I'm asking. I didn't ask, had you had a lot of water? I'm asking, are you actually hydrated? Let me explain. You've got water bottles everywhere. Electrolyte powders you hear about all the time. People putting salt in their water, coconut water, magnesium, potassium. Naturally, people are starting wondering, like, what is it that I actually need? What are these things doing to me, and which ones are useful? The baseline is your body obviously needs water. But your body isn't just a container full of plain water. The fluid inside your body also contains what's called electrolytes that help regulate that fluid balance. It also helps with muscle contraction, nerve signaling, circulation, and a lot of the things that affect actually how you feel and perform, especially when you're training. So when I'm looking at hydration with somebody, I'm looking at more than just how many ounces of water that they're drinking. One of the other things that I ask them is like, well, what have you been doing today? Because somebody sitting inside an air conditioning all day has a very different hydration need than somebody who's been outside training in Texas in the August heat and sun. So it's also how much you sweat that matters, how long you're exercising, the temperature, your body size, and your diet. So let's break this down. Sodium. Sodium gets demonized all the time. It's really not inherently bad. Your body actually does need sodium. And there are cleaner and less clean forms of sodium, and we can talk about that in another show. Sodium helps regulate fluid balance, maintain blood volume, and support nerve signaling and muscle contraction. It doesn't mean that everybody needs to start dumping huge amounts of salt into everything they drink. Context matters. Water is obviously a huge part of what we call hydration, but that's really not the whole picture. Being hydrated is really about maintaining the right fluid and electrolyte balance inside your body. If you're training hard, if you're sweating often, it becomes more important to keep that electrolyte balance. If you're, a cardio person who's doing lots of cardio, obviously some people also will get into this, but also some people sweat more than others. So know your body, understand what you need, and consider what you're losing before you consider what you need to intake. Okay, so then there's potassium. So potassium works very closely with sodium, and it plays a major role in our muscle contractions, also for nerve signaling, some fluid balance, and for normal heart function. But this is where I think it gets a little overcomplicated, at least for some people. You don't necessarily need to get your potassium from an electrolyte packet. I would rather see somebody build potassium in foods that are rich in it in their normal diet. So some of those foods are potatoes, avocado, fruit, leafy greens, beans, yogurt, and other dairy products. There's plenty of good food sources, and I can help with that. Also, coconut water can be very useful too. It actually contains a lot of potassium, more so than a banana. But it's important to understand that coconut water is usually much higher in potassium than sodium. It's more of a potassium-loaded electrolyte drink. So after a really sweaty workout, coconut water by itself may not replace everything that you've lost if you've sweated profusely. And then there's magnesium. Magnesium is actually incredibly important for a lot of different things, but it is one of the key components of your electrolyte balance. It's extremely important also for muscle function, nerve function, energy production, recovery, and especially sleep. And here's where people really miss it. When you sweat, you're not just losing water. You're losing the electrolytes with that water, especially sodium. So sometimes the answer isn't drink more water. We also have to think about what's in the water that you're losing, right? It's not plain water that you're sweating. There's several different forms of magnesium. We can go into those different forms. We can do another video specifically about that because I do think that it deserves its own conversation. Let's get back to electrolytes. So electrolyte products, one thing to remember with electrolyte powders is that they're not all the same. Some contain a lot of sodium. Some have very little. Some contain more potassium. Some contain some magnesium, and some have a lot of sugar in it. Some use artificial sweeteners that I don't like. Also, some are just full of B vitamins and different other things. So a lot of these brands are saying, oh, look, this says electrolyte. It must be, there's a lot of different forms of it. There's a lot of different qualities, and those have to be vetted, understood, and applied intelligently. So just make sure you turn it around, you look at the label, you find out what that is, and use a little research before you make a decision on buying it. If you're doing a long workout in the heat, sweating heavily, an electrolyte product may be extremely convenient, especially if it's something you're doing with a sport. But if you've been just sitting behind a desk for 6 hours in the AC, you don't need to be drinking high sodium electrolyte packets all afternoon just because somebody on social media told you to. So let's talk about just a simple daily approach. For most people, I like to keep it very simple with this. Start with water. Drink consistently throughout the day. Eat a nutrient-dense diet that does provide the potassium and the magnesium that's already in your diet. Then, when you're sweating heavily, think about replacing some of that salt along with the water you're losing. Also, in your diet, you're going to be using salt. So there is salt there. So think about how much salt you're using when you're eating food. Sometimes if you're sweating really heavily, a little water and a little salt can be good. Add a little lemon. Sometimes simply that can just make it taste better. So then I get a lot of the questions of, well, which electrolyte powder should I buy? Maybe you do need one. Maybe you don't. Electrolyte powders are tools and they can be useful. The important thing is to understand what's actually in the product and whether it matches what your body needs. So we first have to understand what hydration is and what electrolytes are, how they function inside our bodies. If somebody's losing a lot of sodium through sweat and continually replacing those losses with enormous amounts of plain water, blood sodium can actually become overly diluted. So just remember that the goal isn't to drink as much water as humanly possible. More water is not necessarily better. We're talking about optimization. That is what I'm about. Optimization of the individual, personalization of the process. And I like most things with nutrition and training, it needs to be individualized. A 120-pound person walking indoors for 30 minutes doesn't have the same needs as a 220-pound guy training outdoors for 2 hours. Your body size matters, the sweat rate matters, your diet matters, the temperature matters, exercise intensity matters. Also, exercise duration matters. So there's not one magic amount of water, just like BMI, right, that we talk about on the other show. There's not one magic amount of water or one magic electrolyte powder that works for everyone. So anyway, if you guys found this helpful, please follow Kinetix Performance Coaching for more practical information on strength, nutrition, and longevity. And coming up, I'm going to break down the different forms of magnesium, what they actually do, how to decide which one makes sense to you. Also, please leave in the comments any topics that you might want to hear me talk about, and I'll try to get to those. Until next time, trade hard, eat well, recover, and take very good care of your body. Thank you.